This one is another one of my favorites. Burn It Down. Tell us about Rod Coronado, a mutual friend of ours and a comrade. And this is a very funny video you've done. You're just sitting in front of a gas pump and people come up and start filling their little cans with gasoline, but it doesn't look like they have a vehicle. They're going to be, trying to get run again. What inspired you to do this song? And man, I mean, I bet you get a lot of flack for this one from all circles.
Well, people really tend to like the song, and it's very interesting what happens. Like when I encourage an audience to sing along with me on that song, it's the older generation are the ones who are most ready to just join in and start singing, and it's younger people who are like looking around and wondering like if they're going to get arrested if they start singing. It's interesting the way that breaks down. Like especially the '60s generation, they're totally ready to just engage in free speech without particularly worrying about the consequences. Whereas younger people are much more concerned about, what are going to be, what's going to happen here, which is interesting how much more paranoid people have become over the years, over the generations. But the song, although it might sound like I'm encouraging everybody to burn down the nearest Walmart, the song is actually just about freedom of speech, which Rod Coronado and many other people have had taken away from them. People who are familiar with the First Amendment are often surprised when they learn about the bill the law that was passed during the Clinton administration to deal with what they called eco-terrorism. And to be clear, what we're talking about when they use the term eco-terrorism, just as with when the British government uses the term terrorism to describe the group Palestine Action, in both cases, whether you're talking about Palestine Action or the Earth Liberation Front or the Annual Liberation Front, you're talking about groups that have never harmed a human being. So that's not terrorism by the way most people understand the term. But when they were calling, ELF an eco-terrorist group, then basically, then they passed a law that if you describe an action that you carried out in the name of eco-terrorism, then you can go to prison for promoting eco-terrorism. So all that Rod did in the Q&A was when somebody asked him how he burned down this building, he just described how he burnt down the building, which was a very simple process of pouring gasoline on the floor and lighting a match. And not complicated. But for describing how he did that, then he was facing a potential 25-year prison sentence, which, if found guilty by a jury of committing this offense, was at the time, and I believe still, a mandatory 25-year prison sentence. No, option for the judge to consider a lesser sentence. And so Rod was one of 5 different people, last I heard. I don't know if the numbers have increased since I last paid attention to enforcement of this particular law, but he was one of 5 people who took a plea bargain and went to prison for a year for giving a speech. And that violated this law. And he did take it to trial, but there was a hung jury, and rather than going to trial again, he took a plea bargain, which is what the other 4 people all did before even trying it with a trial. They all took the plea bargain because they were all being threatened with 25 years in prison if they got found guilty. So they all took a plea bargain to go to prison for a year. Each of them went to prison for a year for giving a speech in America.
And now there's this abhorrent thing with Palestine Action. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I wrote a song about that too. They are the government, the UK government, in July passed, or actually earlier this month, August, I guess, they passed a law that the Parliament passed a law that saying anything in favor of the group Palestine Action was violating Section 12 of the UK Terrorism Act of 2000. And for violating Section 12, you face up to 14 years in prison. And other people, journalists and people with Twitter accounts and whatever, have been arrested on a number of occasions prior to this law being passed for violating Section 12 of the Terrorism Act for praising proscribed organizations, or at least being perceived to be praising them. Like if you say that somebody got arrested and brutalized for saying that the Hamas-led uprising in October of 2023 was impressive. For calling it impressive, that was considered to be praise of Hamas and praise of everything they ever did. And so she, I believe, is still facing the potential of 14 years in prison for this post. And she's been arrested twice now, Sarah Wilkinson. Other people in England have been arrested. Other journalists have been arrested, or people, social media influencers or whatever, people with big followings, have been arrested for the same kind of thing. But now they declared Palestine Action to be a terrorist group along the lines of Hamas and whatever, Ansar Allah, Hezbollah. Despite the fact that Palestine Action has never harmed a human being in their activities, which are certainly have involved lots of property destruction of war machine kind of stuff, but in factories that make weapons to export to Israel, but they never hurt people. And actually, before the parliament passed the law against them, the British courts had often been finding Palestine actionists not guilty, because under British law, it's actually illegal to export arms to a country that's committing war crimes. And even though they're doing it in Britain all the time, what they're actually doing is illegal under their own laws, although they don't enforce their own laws. But when Palestine Action was able to introduce this into the court proceedings in terms of making the argument that what we're doing is actually enforcing international law, which the British government is violating by exporting these weapons, then the courts have found them not guilty on many different occasions, which is why the Crown, the authorities in England have been hesitant in many cases to even press charges. After Palestine actionists have done $1 million of damage in a factory, in some cases, they didn't arrest them for 3 days, and then once they did, they dropped the charges after spending one night in prison and jail. This is the kind of thing that was going on. So the Parliament, apparently felt they had to act, and they they passed this law that Palestine Action is now a terrorist group. And so since they passed this law, there's been many hundreds, I don't know how many, more than 500, many more than 500 now, getting 500 in one day, a few days ago, getting arrested for holding a sign saying, "I support Palestine Action."
Yeah, so they've taken the criminalization of speech to a new level. It's one thing for Rod to talk about a terrorist action he did, but now if you say, "I like what Rod Coronado did," that would be criminalized as well if the same law was applied here. It's just stunning. So is friendly fascism. It's it's amazing what they can do without being labeled fascists. A lot of people were talking about when the demonstrations, the Wall Street demonstrations were happening about what is fascism, and Tom Hartman, I know, would talk about it as corporatism all the time. And he said, I think it's apocryphal, but that that's what Mussolini said fascism was. Well, we certainly have corporatism, but there seems to be a real problem with Americans recognizing fascism, especially if it's performed by their heroes, the Democrats, who they're afraid to call out because, man, if we recognize the Democrats and the Republicans as organized crime syndicates, then who are our heroes going to be? Well, your answer is you and me. The people will come together.
Absolutely. Social movements, yeah. And the best social movements in this country have always happened while there's been a Democrat in office. Because the best social movements are the ones that are not shilling for one party or another, but are actually popular movements. And so, like the global justice movement, it came around when, Clinton was in the White House. Occupy Wall Street came around when Obama was in the White House. The war, the anti-war movement against the war in Vietnam, Johnson was in office. Because they've all been movements that have clearly identified the enemy as the ruling class, not just one of the ruling class parties, but both of them. Both of the rich people that leave. The average Democrat in Congress is wealthier than the average Republican.
I did not know that.
Yeah, wow. Just a little bit, but yeah.
I heard when Pelosi was saying she was against the wealth tax that I think Elizabeth Warren had proposed, her family was worth $80 million at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the division isn't between Republicans and Democrats in this country. It's between the people who make a living from owning and those who make a living from working.
Absolutely. And this is a distinction that it really needs to be emphasized, because people make this mistake of talking about the middle class, and what they're talking about has nothing to do with the middle. You got the top quintile that really own, like, what, 80% of the country. I mean, this is once you get up to the top quintile, they own everything. There's hardly anybody is a landlord who's not in the top quintile. They represent the entirety of the landlord class. And then of course, as you go up into that quintile, you get up into the 1%, and then the wealth gets so much more concentrated. 1% owns half of the wealth of the country, but once you get to the top 20%, they own 80% of the wealth of the country, leaving all the rest of us to split up that 20%, and then we can all argue about whether some of us are getting screwed even worse by virtue of our race, gender, age, etc. But what we're talking about is the bottom 80% squabbling over the crumbs of the 20% left. I mean, if it's not obvious, well, it is obvious to the vast majority of people that class is the defining factor here. It is the thing that we need to overcome. And the arguments of the liberals that the Democrats like to make, the rich liberals that run the Democratic Party, they love to talk about race and gender because they don't want to talk about class, because it's the one thing that actually unites everybody, and where we can all see that we're all being screwed. But as long as they can divide us and talk about some of us getting screwed more than others, then we can all argue about race and gender forever and ignore the elephant in the living room that's actually running everything, and which is actually the far greater phenomenon in terms of division than race or gender could ever possibly be. How can you possibly think about race or gender being anything close to class when 1% of the ruling class of the population owns half of the wealth? There's nothing like that in race or gender.
Yeah, and it seems that what Democratic activists need to get real about is recognizing those politicians in their own party who are like the Republicans, fighting for the interests of the plutocracy. Because if you look at how they vote, they all vote the same on the military. They all vote the same with big pharma, with big agriculture, banking interests. But the Republicans have got the anti-abortion people, they've got the guns and the anti-woke stuff, and then the Democratic politicians talk about abortion rights, Black Lives Matter, the rights of illegal immigrants, and they get us all thinking that if they talk about these things, then I should support them. But how they're going to actually make a major change in any of the major issues, the voters don't even really require that of them. And that's why it's so pathetic to try to do any kind of real electoral politics this day. I think Democrats have got to recognize the class war within the Democratic Party and engage in ousting the plutocratic interests from the party and bring in the Winona LaDukes and people like me, and Ralph Nader would have been a great one to get in there, and Aaron Brockovich.
It's a nice fantasy. It's a nice fantasy, and it's never going to happen. The Democratic Party, the Democratic Party was the party that supported the Confederacy in the Civil War. That's the origins of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is the party of the white man. That's how they build themselves for the first 100 years of their existence. And then since then, they've tried to build themselves as the intersectional party of yada, yada. But the Democratic Party is just the party of the other party of the rich, and they've always been the other party of the rich, and they've never been anything different from that. But they like to, play with the idea of having the progressives on their side and being like slightly more in favor of social spending. Supposedly, the average Democrat today isn't anything close to as progressive as the average Republican was 60 years ago. I mean, under Eisenhower, the highest tax bracket for the rich was 91%. I mean, it's Democrats today aren't anything close to as progressive as Nixon was, on those issues, on economic issues, on social spending. Nixon was far more progressive than Bill Clinton, or any Democrat in power since. Of course, I would love to, given the options, I'd certainly love to see, Bernie Sanders get elected president or AOC, compared to the rest of the party, but it's not going to happen. And I think the sooner we give up on the Democratic Party and form extra parliamentary social movements, the better, because actually that's how change has always happened in this country. It's never happening because of who we elect. It's happening because of what's going on in the streets. And that's what impacts both parties. And that's why both parties are generally acting in unison. Both parties supported the New Deal in the 1930s. Both parties supported increased social spending in the 1960s to deal with the all the riots and everything. That was one of the things that both parties were supporting at that time. Both parties supported that 91% tax bracket. If it hadn't been both parties, it wouldn't have happened. It's both parties supported dropping the atom bomb on Hiroshima.
Well, and it was one party that did it, and it wasn't the Republican Party.
Oh, no, that's right.
And it wasn't George W. Bush who was the first president to lie us into war. LBJ did it.
War. Every war the U.S. has ever been in was started by lying about their intentions. Every one of them, without exception.
I just don't think that we can influence any of those people from the outside, although that is where we have to have a viable, powerful set of, social movements. I mean, we've got enough diversity that it's not just one big people's movement anymore. But the major things with the climate and stuff, I don't know how we're going to do what we have to do unless somehow we get a good chunk of people, our kind of people, into Congress. And I think the Green Party has shown over 40 years that it can't do it in America because of our system, the way it was able to do it in parliamentary systems in Europe and other places in the world.
I often talk about that, especially with both Europeans and Americans, because I spend a lot of time in both continents, and there's a lot of people, a lot of radicals of whatever sort of ilk, who tend to think that capitalism is all the same everywhere, and that is just not the case. In Europe, capitalism is a whole different beast, and there's a lot of historical reasons for that. A lot of it has to do with the rebellions in 1848. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they never had slavery, and they have much less of these kinds of historical divisions around race, so that people were much more able to focus on class. But for a whole variety of reasons, including, of course, World War I and World War II being fought in Europe, there was a lot of reasons why democracy has done so much better in Europe than it has in the United States. But it is a very important distinction that I would make, that although the main two ruling parties tend to dominate in European politics as well, very similarly to the way it happens here. In Europe, there's in many countries in Europe, there's actually the actual possibility of a third party actually winning, and this does happen sometimes, and that keeps the other parties much more on their toes than here, where it's obviously like a duopoly of rich people, whereas there can actually be an authentic third party, like a real working class third party. There are those parties in Europe, and they do become influential in various parliaments, and they do take over entire cities, often. And it's a real multi-party system in Europe, and it's really distinct, just distinctly different and distinctly better than the U.S. system.
Yeah. By the way, in 1982, I was in the Citizens Party. We were starting the first Green Party, and in 1980, with Barry Commoner, and then 82, Gore Vidal was running for Senate against Jerry Brown, and so the San Diego County Citizens Party became the Gore Vidal for Senate Committee, and we took him around, and he was pushing for the United States to develop into a parliamentary system, which we thought was a grand idea if we ever wanted to get the Citizens Party or Green Parties in there.
Rodney Coronado was arrested for a speech that he gave one evening by the San Diego beach. He stated his opinions, they sounded just like mine. Now they want to put him behind bars till 2029. Prosecutor said the problem was the speech showed intent. I couldn't figure out exactly what that meant. You can't describe an action, say you thought that it was swell. So what'll happen when we sing this? Who the heck can tell? But we don't like the condo and we're gonna burn it down. Corporate terrorists drive them out of town. We'll bring a lot of gasoline, pour it on the floor, light a match, say a prayer, and run right out the door. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. We're going to burn it down. 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 If you just sang that chorus, then you just broke the law. To be an eco-terrorist, now you just gotta flap your jaw. And hey, who knows, by the time you have a chance to blink, whether you're a criminal might depend on what you think. But we don't like the bulldozer, we're gonna burn it down. Corporate terrorists drive them out of town. We'll bring a lot of gasoline, pour it on the floor, light a match, say a prayer, and run right out the door. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. We're going to burn it down. 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 Verse that came for Rod made me next to come for you. Let me tell you what I think all of us should do. Sing the song with me, raise your fist and caterwaul. If we fight together, they can't arrest us all. 'Cause we don't like the Walmart and we're gonna burn it down. Corporate terrorists drive them out of town. We'll bring a lot of gasoline, pour it on the floor, light a match, say a prayer, and run right out the door. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. We're going to burn it down. 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 Burn it down.
Do you want to talk about Chris Chandler making your videos?
Yeah, and I think of the videos that are in this collection of videos, he made the one about New Orleans and the one about Occupy Wall Street, Stay Right Here, and The Last Lincoln Veteran. And Chris, I first met Chris in the early 90s when we were both busking on the streets of Boston, and he was busking a lot more. I was more like hanging around listening to the buskers. I started becoming a full-time busker a few years after that. And busker, by which I mean street music, if there's any Americans who don't know that term. But then he brought me to the first gathering of the People's Music Network I ever went to, and that's how I met Pete Seeger and all kinds of wonderful folks. And then 1996, I believe it was, or 7, I can't remember. I was his guitarist and singer for I was his backup band for 1 or 2 or however many months, however tours, however you divide that. We traveled all over the country together, and I backed him up. And then when I was recording and writing my own songs along the line, I had already noticed that he had great video skills because he was doing video stuff with his own poems, and I asked him to, or I guess I hired him at a similarly dismal rate of pay as with Bjorn Magni to make videos, and he made a bunch of really good ones.
Yeah, you've got a great collection here from all those different people. I've enjoyed every single one of them. The real game changer in a way, environmental horror in the United States in modern times, New Orleans, where you could see everything wrong with America in just that one situation. Tell us about your approach to singing about Katrina and New Orleans.
I mean, I just tried to paint the picture in that song about what was going on. And at the time I wrote the song, it was all happening. It wasn't over, it was happening. And I wrote the song actually in a hotel room in Beirut, Lebanon. I had something in common with George W. Bush. We both flew over New Orleans. He was on his way to a fundraiser in California, and I was on my way to tour Lebanon and Jordan and the West Bank. I got to New Orleans a few months later and saw the writing on the chalkboards of the people that were listing their names, thinking they'd likely die, and at least people would know who was here before they died. And, you know, such a dismal situation that was so exacerbated by the authorities preventing people from rescuing others and just letting them drown. They seemed to be treating the whole of New Orleans like it was like a potential riot zone rather than a place full of people that needed to be rescued. It was such a blatantly racist reaction to a tragedy, to a disaster, to climate change, to badly maintained infrastructure, to everything. But they just treated it like like they were like the majority black population of New Orleans was the enemy, rather than American citizens who needed to be rescued from disaster. And so, and then of course, after the abject failure of the U.S. government to launch an effective rescue of the people that were dying, then they poured salt in the wounds afterwards by doing a completely inept job of caring for the survivors. As I'm sure you know, and as a lot of people who are around then knows, the only people serving hot food to the homeless thousands and thousands of people in New Orleans for months was the Rainbow family. That's wonderful that they did that, and that's not at all to say anything negative about the Rainbow family. I'm so glad that somebody did something, but FEMA was sending people to the Rainbow family, and FEMA was feeding FEMA. Literally, FEMA was feeding FEMA. What the hell is FEMA for? They did a much better job after the flood in New Orleans in 1929, actually. The government did. After 1929, after the flood in 1929, which saw massive thousands and thousands of people in New Orleans made homeless, the government set up tent camps. They were racially segregated, but they were tent camps, and they took care of everybody who was homeless from the flood in 1929. They didn't do anything like that after Katrina.
By the way, was there some particular reason why there's a sign for Murphy Oil Company
in the video?
In the song?
In the
Not
video.
that I know of. No, you'd have to ask Chris about that.
Okay, yeah, and inaction is a crime. That was a nice slogan in there. Mall's more important than people's lives.
Yeah, because they were literally in the course of this. Of course, I had been reading wonderful journalists like the guy in the Times-Picayune and other publications who had been writing for years about the state of the infrastructure in New Orleans. And of course, there had been activists that I was already, along with many other people, very familiar with, who had been saying that if we don't take care of the wetlands outside of this, out at the mouth of the Mississippi, then there's much less of the kinds of vegetation and all that could absorb a storm surge, and that the city and the levees were going to become much more vulnerable if they did things like build that mall that I referred to in the song, instead of the wetlands staying wetlands and doing what wetlands do so well. So, this was an entirely man-made and capitalism-made disaster.
Everybody knew that it could happen. The likelihood was clear, the future was coming. Now it's here. They had to fix the levees, 'cause otherwise they'd break. On one side was the city, above it was the lake. It was in the daily papers, in bold letters was the writ. What would happen when the big one hit? But every year they cut the funding just a little more, so they could give it to the army to fight their oil war. National Geographic and the Times Picayune, they forecast the apocalypse, said it was coming soon. Preparations must be made, they said, now is the time. It was years ago, they shouted, inaction was a crime. They said the dikes must be improved and the wetlands must be saved. But Washington decided instead they should be paved, 'cause laws were more important than people's lives. So put some gold dust in your eyes and hope no storm arrives. New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans. Years and years of warning, no evacuation plan. It was just if the waters rose, get out if you can. There were no buses, no one chartered any trains. There was no plan to rescue all of those who would remain. All the people with no money, all the people with no wheels, all of those who couldn't hotwire what that they could steal. Thousands and thousands of people abandoned by the state, abandoned by their country, just left to meet their fate. New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans. Sad and awful days when people shouted from their houses, dying on their roofs. When people came to find them, they were turned back by the troops. They died there with no water, they died there in the heat. They were shot down by the soldiers for trying to find some food to eat. New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans. Now the city is in ruins, a massive toxic sea scattered through the nation. 500,000 refugees. Here we are in the richest country on the earth, where the color of your skin determines what your life is worth, where oil is the king, where global warming is ignored, where the very end of life is the place we're heading towards, where it's more than just a metaphor, the flooding of the dike. And if we don't stop this madness, the whole world will be like New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans, New Orleans, New
The last song, London is Burning. Some lives are worth less and some are worth more. Tell us about this song.
London is Burning was after a black man named Mark Duggan was killed by the police while sitting in the backseat of a car Basically that set off some of the biggest riots that have happened in decades in England. There were riots in every major city in England, although interestingly, no riots in Scotland or Wales. But all the major cities in England, there were big riots all over London. There were lots of stuff getting, burned, and lots of fancy electronic stores getting looted and all that. And I wrote that song just to describe what it's like, or try to describe what it's like for all those folks who get treated badly all the time by the state, and then something happens, like somebody gets killed like that, and that's just the straw that breaks the camel's back, and people rebel, and then that's what happened. And people find different ways to express that rebellion, and some ways that are less easy to recognize or process by certain folks than others. But what was clear to so many people at that time was they were rebelling against a racist and also against class oppression as well. But there's sort of major racial overtones to that whole thing, with the fact that Mark Duggan was black, and the fact that, as in so many other countries, black people are disproportionately targeted by police for violence in England, as they are in so many other places. Although it's not as bad there as it is here, but possibly most notably about that song is the lead guitar that you hear is Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine, who was nice enough to contribute a lead track to one of my albums. And nobody knows about that. I mean, I couldn't even register him as the lead player. Like, when I was putting the song up for streaming and stuff like that, they won't even let you do that. Like, there's some, you could, if it's somebody really famous who was on the track, I don't know how it works that you can actually say that they were on the track, because you can't do it. I mean, the platforms won't let you do it. It's like they don't believe it or something. I don't know. I didn't try like getting past this like block, but like talking to a human, like, no, he really is the guitarist. Like, what do I have to do to tell you? Like,
Crazy. Well, actually, there were a couple of other songs in which you had a pretty hot slicing guitar, like I think even the last Lincoln Veteran. Was that also Tom Morello?
No, that's not Tom Morello. That is Nick DeAngelis, who is a fantastic guitarist in Portland, and he has played on a bunch. Yeah, he was all over Big Red Sessions and Meanwhile in Afghanistan, and a bunch of my albums.
Yeah, it ain't folk music anymore.
Sitting in his car, they say he might have had a gun. What we know for sure is he had 5 kids, daughters and sons. Now he can't have a family, he'll never see his friends. His neighbors understand what kind of message this sends. Some life is worth less, some life is worth more. You don't have to be a mathematician to know the score. Some people get shot just for being who they are. Some people play with iPads, take vacations, drive in fancy cars. Some people go to universities, some people do not. It depends on where you were born and how much money you got. The government cuts their spending, widening the divide, then reacts with disbelief when they face the rising tide of anger at the cuts of the futures that they rob. With each day so many have to live without a job. Now the flames are getting hotter, maybe coming to your town. London is burning down. Cameron went on TV in his suit and tie. If the riots asked the question, then this was his reply. We'll arrest these hooligans, these people without shame. They are only criminals, and it's only criminals to blame. Morals have to among the peasants' ranks. So let us lock them up while we bail out the banks. When that's the way they look at it, it's not very hard to watch things fall apart in this house of cards. Now the flames are getting hotter, they keep coming to your town. London is burning down. Clueless people whine. These kids have too much freedom, and all this is just a sign that we need more policemen to teach them some respect. Well, if that's your line, then I know just what you can expect. The class will be repeated until the lesson has been learned. All you need is some injustice to make your cities burn. All you need is the perception, whether or not it's true, that most of us will never live the way you do. Now the flames are getting hotter, maybe coming to your town. London is burning down.
So, David, tell us, you're coming to Garberville. I'm so excited. You're bringing Kamala Emanuel. What's the Ministry of Culture? And so what are you doing these days? And what is David Rovics' performance like what's it going to be like in 2026?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a lot of, in the past few years, a lot of the touring I've done has been with Kamala, and she's been singing with me and traveling with me in many different parts of the world. And which makes it all much more fun and much more musically interesting. Well, we'll be singing a lot of songs about history and current events, like I always do, and there will be a bit of a disproportionate, much more than usual focus on Gaza, but although I do write a whole lot of songs on that subject and record them and put them out there in the live shows, they don't necessarily dominate everything, because because basically I part of the role of the performer that I take seriously is live performance in particular, is you need to leave the audience feeling inspired and feeling like ready to continue living and maybe even to join the movement or do something, and you don't want to leave the audience feeling like jumping off the nearest tall building. So I tend to work in a lot more sort of funny songs and songs about successful actions and solidarity in the live shows, and which are probably less dominant on my recordings, which are often focused a bit more on dismal events that don't have a happy ending.
But also on the cool people who are living in those dismal situations and their noble struggles to make things better.
Yeah, I have a lot of songs about that. Yeah. And then I just have a lot of songs that are actually just describing horrible events, like, gunning down little children, gunning down little girls and boys, for example, is one of the songs I've written recently, and it's actually one of several dozen songs that I've written about massacring starving children who are trying to get food. This has been happening every day since March 2nd, every day, and before March 2nd too, but every day since then, massacre of starving children. So, I mean, there's so many more songs to be written, but, they don't, there's no silver lining in that. Other than maybe some of the the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation people have become whistleblowers, like that wonderful American soldier who basically spent a few days there. It's like, this is crazy, and has been speaking to the media and all that. But
So we're not going to hear you do all 64 of your Palestine songs.
yeah, that's for sure.
Oh my God! I mean, how do you? I mean, it must be extremely unsettling for you to dwell on a topic long enough to craft an artistic song about it, and then you have to live with the songs that you perform. How do you get through all that, David? Are you okay?
It's really hard, but it'd be harder if I weren't doing it, because I don't know, I know a lot of people who just stopped watching the news, stopped going to protests, and just try to get on with life, and because they're just too overwhelmed with the horrors of everything that are happening. But when it comes down to it, actually, most of these people that I'm describing are lonely, and the disengagement has not helped them. They don't feel better. It hasn't been therapeutic. What's therapeutic when you already know about the horrors that are happening? What's therapeutic is trying to do something about it, and knowing other people that want to do something about it, and having common feelings, and identifying with other people that feel the same way, community, house concerts, events like the one you're organizing at the Playhouse. This is what people need, and this is what keeps people engaged, not shutting themselves off, so, and I don't know how I would shut myself off. I can't, I've been keeping track of world news since I was 12, and I don't think that's going to change. But as long as I'm writing songs about it, then it makes it a lot easier to deal with than if I am not on a day when I'm not writing a song. Those are the days when I, get close to losing my shit.
Behind the prison walls. Julian is
Behind these prison walls. Mm-hmm.
Hold on. Ash. Come on, buddy.
It's pretty much like a toddler.
I asked my veterinarian how old a human cats are like, and he said a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
Another friend of mine who's really into cats and dogs says a 2-year-old.
Yeah, somewhere around there, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
They're wonderful, though, and aren't really causing a big impact on the planet. Like if I had my own kids. I mean, I kind of wanted to, but my life just didn't allow me to do it. But, when I think about it now, well, when people decide to have kids, I know you decided kind of late. It's like I'm totally with them. They're parents. Okay, that's the reality now, and I don't really get into why people decided to do that. It seems kind of natural, like that's what humans do. It doesn't seem odd to me, but man, everybody. I've worked for years trying to minimize my impact on the planet, and then, you realize that every single person, what does this take? Took 11 years to go from 7 billion to 8 billion people or some such thing like that. And I just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is another thing too, like, how are your kids handling this reality that they're in? I mean, especially with a dad like you who doesn't brush off reality, who in fact, gets a magnifying glass out. That must be really hard for you as a parent to, try to raise kids whose lives come out of joy and compassion and connection and community. And then there's this whole culture that's monstrous.
Yeah, in terms of the whole concept of raising kids, and having kids, I think of it the same way as I think about things like flying in a plane or any number of other activities that we engage in that, give us a ridiculously impossibly large carbon footprint. I think, and I make this argument as emphatically as I can, as often as I can, both in songs and in every other way, to try to, with the aim of convincing anybody that actually believes that they can adjust their lifestyle and change anything in the world, to disabuse them of this notion, because the only way forward, I'm quite convinced, has always been now and has forever been collective action. We have to act collectively and collectively decide things like we're going to ground all the planes. And once we decide to ground all the planes, I'll be completely on board with that, and I will stop touring in Europe and Australia and all those other places very happily. But as long as there's business people traveling all around, I'm going to travel around too, to oppose what they're doing. Because I'm not going to abdicate my ability to tour in different countries, because to try to lower my impact. I think that would actually be that would do a lot more harm than good, because we need organizers out there. We need well-adjusted, emotionally happy, well-adjusted people, like children and adults. We need a healthy society to take action to change the world. Otherwise, we're doomed. So I think good people who are going to raise good children who are going to potentially turn out to be good activists, or you can't guarantee these things, but we need good parents out there having kids. That's a good thing, and we need it to lower the population in the world. But we're not going to do that by our individual decisions. We're going to do that by changing entire societies, because we already know what causes population growth and what causes countries to have lower their population. I mean, it's all about poverty. It's always been all about poverty. That's obvious now to anybody that's paying attention to how how societies go. They get bigger when they're poor. They get smaller when they have a certain level of wealth and a social safety net and that sort of thing. So it's this is not complicated, but it is made complicated by corporations like Exxon that have for decades been trying to convince us all that we're going to be able to change everything by individual lifestyle choices. And they've been promoting this whole orientation in order to disempower collective action. And it's been very effective. It's convinced a huge number of liberals, especially, and others, that they really just need to watch over their recycling and eat less meat, and that's going to somehow magically through some unexplainable process change the world. But it's very obvious. We have to shut down all the coal plants. We have to transform the whole transportation infrastructure in the Western much of the world. I mean, especially the United States. We have to have a good mass transit that's powered by alternative energy. We have to do so much. I mean, so much of it is just like low-hanging fruit, but it's like we have to get rid of all disposable packaging completely. Ban it. It should be banned right now. But until disposable packaging is banned, it's not going to make any difference in any significant way whether or not I'm getting a my food and wrapped in plastic at the food carts or not. I mean, I'm not going to be able to change this, and people need to know that. Individually, you're useless. We need to collectively change things. You're useful as an individual because of your ability to mobilize a collective. And because what we need is collective action, and what we need is action on the part of government. We need collective action in order to take over governments. But as long as the capitalists are in charge, we're doomed. And there's no way to sugarcoat that or shine the turd. We are doomed if capitalism is going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I do not see personal lifestyle choices as the path to saving the planet. But you mentioned, I think you were into Taoism. I think of it more in terms of my way. I remember, 20 years ago, I saw some figure that showed that the impact on the planet of a Bangladeshi was 1/87th of that of an American.
Yeah.
So for me, I grew up in Los Angeles where I was told, hey, study hard, get good grades, get into college, you can get a job you want, and then you'll make enough money so that the rest of the time you can just watch whatever TV shows, movies, go to concerts, go to the malls you want to do, and that's what your life will be about. You will go through life consuming these different media products. And when I came up here to Humboldt County, where I live in a town of 2,000 people, I had all the same kind of consumer addictions that all of my friends that I grew up with had. I look at them now. We just had our 50th anniversary, our 50th reunion. I didn't go, and they're just like our grandparents. There's like no difference in them, and they would completely freak out if they couldn't go to the latest movie, get the latest iPhone, and all that stuff. I won't freak out. I've got my basic tools, and I go out and put on David Rovics concerts and get involved in plays and crafts fairs in our markets and stuff like that. So it's more of a way of getting myself off the drug than anything else, And you're right. I mean, if you didn't buy a plane ticket to go to the British Isles or whatever, it wouldn't cause any flights to be canceled. There would be absolutely no difference whatsoever. So you are using these things as tools, and what is it? Using the tools of the devil to fight the devil, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also don't like living, a very high consumption lifestyle anyway. I'd rather just, have more time to hang out with my kids, So yes, for sure, it's the same kind of attitude. But that's just, to be living a good life. The best things in life actually are free. It's true. Friendship, love,